Writer Showcase Podcast. I'm Phil Nasons, and I'm the host of this podcast, brought to you by the authors and you, the listening public. You won't hear any commercials or advertisements because this podcast is funded by the writers who appear on this program and also by you, the listening audience. If you would like to be a guest on the show or would like to support the work being done here, please contact me at thewritershow.wordpress.com and I'll be in touch with you very quickly. Today we're going to be talking about some tough topics. My next guest is actually the co-author of this book. This book appeared in print in the 1930s. Her great uncle is the author, and my next guest discovered the book, discovered pieces of the book, and then put it all together, and there were some pieces missing, and she kind of filled in the blanks and then re-edited it so that people could actually understand it in today's language. She did a fantastic job. The book is called The Night of the Dixie Wilds, and the co-author, please welcome Miss K-Trina Meador to the Writer Showcase Podcast. K-Trina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Phil. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, me too, and I'm finally getting this introduction down after a couple of times. It's all good, right?
It is.
Practice makes perfect, I suppose. Now, tell us a little bit about who K-Trina Meador is.
Well, I'm still trying to figure that out on my own, too.
Are we all? Well, what do you know so far?
I currently live in Yukon, Oklahoma. It's a suburb outside of Oklahoma City, and it's a great place to be at this point in my life. Enjoying the city, enjoying the sports that it offers, the OKC Thunder, and currently I'm just working and doing my writing.
So you've been to Loud City, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, we talk about the Thunder every week here, and my couple of my guests are, well, one of them is a beat reporter who covers them. It is awful loud there.
It is.
I'll be there soon. When I return to America, I'll definitely be down there to watch a game. There's no question. But now we talked about, or I basically tried to introduce the book as best I could.
I think you did a good job on that. This is a interesting story.
It is. Tell us about it.
I came across this book when my aunt, Sharon Lindahl, showed it to me. And when she brought this book to me, she had it wrapped in paper protecting it, and it had been burned. And inside the pages, it was falling apart, and there was burn spots within the pages, and the last 20 pages of it was missing. And then she began to tell me the story about this book. It is my grandmother's uncle who actually penned this book back in 1929 when he was 74 years of age. And I find that just awesome because, it doesn't matter how young or how old you are. If you want to pursue a dream, then pursue it. And I was holding the evidence of my uncle's dream in my hands. So we did have a problem. It was burned where some of the pages were unlegible, and the last 20 pages of the book was missing because we didn't know how the story ended. I went on Amazon and did a quick search, and I was able to find one for sale, which surprised me. And what I did is I ordered the book, and it was in perfect condition. And so I took the book over to her, and after 30 or 40 years of having this book in possession, she was finally able to read the rest of the story, quoting Paul Harvey. And from then it went on, and I'll get into a little bit more of that a little bit later. But that's how the book started to come about.
Well, that's tremendous. It's a tremendous story. And we're glad that you rediscovered the book and that it's out there. It's a fantastic read. Your uncle did an incredible job.
He did.
Now, Now, what about Buck Taylor? Now, he is the main character in this story. Is he patterned after a real life person?
Actually, his name is Buck Tyler in the book, and yes, he's actually patterned after my uncle, who is Walter Taylor.
All right. Now, why did I put down Taylor instead of Tyler? That's silly. But anyway, so he's a real life person.
Yes,
Do you
yes,
think it could be? Do you think it could have been your great uncle?
yes. That was the whole intent of this book. Was this book is actually written off of the true events that occurred to my uncle, and he just changed the name of the book. I mean, the name of the male character in the book.
Ah, that's why I did it. See, I figured it
Yes,
was him.
yeah. The names are very close together. You have Buck Taylor in the book, and then I'm sorry, Buck Tyler in the book, and Walter Taylor as the man.
Yeah, well, I thought honestly, I thought he was talking about himself because it seemed too much like an autobiography in a way, kind
Yes,
of. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's how we got
Yes,
it. So his name is Buck Tyler in the book, but it's really
and
Uncle Walter,
yes,
which is
yes,
all good because this is a great book. Now,
it
here's the
is.
thing, though. There's a lot of things in this book. First of all, we would call this historical fiction, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but technically, it really, yeah, okay, historical fiction. We can, dice up the different subplots.
He doesn't. Yeah, he does admit that he had to fill in some gaps there, and so it is fiction because of that. But its basis is off of true events that happened in his life.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now there's a lot going on here. This book was set up at the tail end of the Civil War. The Reconstruction era had just begun. Things were quite difficult for folks down in the South, especially for people who owned slaves, right?
That's correct. The way it was described to me is that um, Buck Tyler and his family was very rich, had the plantation home, had many slaves, had many acreages to work. But after the Civil War ended, they could no longer uh, produce off of that land because they didn't have the help to do it. So they decided to sell and move to Texas. They had their plantation in Mississippi.
And that was common back then, right?
It was very common. It was very common to have that attitude that they have to endure. I mean, they just lost the war. So not only did they lose the war, they lost their slaves, and they're being humiliated by the attitude the that the slaves and even some of the northern people who stayed down in the south had to do.
Now, when you say humiliated, what does that mean exactly?
Well, the taunting that went on. You know how people can taunt you and make you feel bad about, and there was also a lot of anger that was in the atmosphere. The whites were angry that they lost the war. The blacks were angry that they were held as slaves for so long, and even that they were free. Um, how are they going to earn the money? How are they going to live? There was a lot of bitterness and resentment in that time period.
Yeah, I know. I've read a lot about that. What do you think, though, when you look back at humiliation? These white sharecroppers who were using Africans to do the work for them. What are they supposed to do now? They're finished, right?
Pretty much. I don't think they had a lot of choices put before them.
And what do you think about the person who says they got what they deserved? They being the plantation owners.
That's a tough subject. Um,
Because that comes in your book. That's one of the
yeah,
first things that when I thought about that, I mean, because your book is going to force people to really think, and that's what makes this book so good.
it does because it shows. a lot of events that, I mean, it's in your face type events that's going on at this point. And I know that it made me stop and think about how difficult life was back then, um, for both sides. And some of the things that went on in this book is truly eye opening.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. No question about that. Now, when you talk about struggles, what types of struggles was it for, let's say, the plantation owners who lost their slaves? The ones who were living high on the hog, and then all of a sudden, that's the end of that.
I think that it is a struggle for anybody who is used to having more of a luxury lifestyle to go back to the manual labor. That is an adjustment that they had to make. And I think it carried its own form of humiliation in doing this because they weren't used to that. They used to have people serving them. They weren't used to being the ones who had to do it on their own. That's part of it. Not being able to produce and to their crops, and having some of the blacks decided to stay in that area, and having them there every day to remind them of that, I think was another adjustment that they had to make.
Yeah, when you say, you mean an adjustment in the sense that they no longer own those people.
Of, yeah, of pride. They don't have. I'm sure that state of luxury that they were in when they owned the plantation and all the slaves, and they were pretty much living pretty good, and now they didn't have that anymore, and they had to face the people who were working for them, and now they don't have to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because a lot of people who would read this book in the lens of 2014 would say, "So what? Who gave them the right to own people in the first place? They got what they had coming." And I suppose that's a fair way to look at that, right?
Yes, it is. This is a very difficult book. Um, Being the great, great, great niece of the man who lived this, it was hard for me to read. But what I had to do was I had to transport my mindset to that time era because that's how it was. Whether in this day and age we agree or disagree or like it or don't, that was how that time period was. And there was a lot of parts in that book that I was like going, oh, okay. But you have to take the bad with the good in this book.
Oh yeah, it's going to definitely make people think, and that's why it's a great book, and that's what books are supposed to do. Now, historical fiction means that this book was based in actual historical times. The history portion is not invented or made up, but the storyline is, right?
That's correct. You
Okay,
know,
you
my
just
uncle, yeah, my uncle wrote a paragraph that I think sums it up really good. If you don't mind, could I share that? He,
absolutely go right ahead.
okay, he wrote that no period in the history of the United States of America formed a field so rich with chivalry, romance, and drama as the years between 1865 and 1870, the so-called days of the Reconstruction of the South, during which period the nation was born again and started on its climb to the top rung of power among the nations of the world.
Yeah, that's pretty fair right there. There's no question. Now, what type of struggles did the former slaves face? Because you mentioned that too, and they're a big part of this story and a part of this Reconstruction era, obviously.
Well, you know, the plantation owners who owned the slaves, they provided shelter for them. Of course, we can argue about the quality of that because many times it wasn't that good, but they were uneducated, and they were at least provided some food because they had to be able to survive on the plantations to be able to work. So when that ended, you have a group of people who are uneducated and had to figure out a way to support themselves. And those two combinations right there would set up just basic struggle of survival. You know, how do you get your food? How do you get a job? Are you skilled? I'm sure some of them were, and they were able to do skilled labor. But in the book, it actually talks about the education of the ex-slaves, if you want to call it that. And it talks about how some people from the north came down to try to help educate, and they were not able to do that for one reason or another. So I think the education was a huge struggle for them.
Yeah, from all my research, and I did papers on this in high school and in college, is that these people were very skilled. The problem is no one would hire them because they were black. That's why they had to go to the north, because
Mm-hmm.
down south they were still looked down upon. So there were struggles, but there were a lot of struggles in this period. Taking flight and having to leave your home was one of those struggles and one of those challenges that they had to face. Now, Buck is the hero of the story.
Yes.
Do you think heroes are born or are they made? Was Buck born a hero or did his circumstances bring out the hero in him?
I believe that a hero is someone who gives of themselves for the betterment of others. And I think that is a trait that is born within someone, but is cultivated by their surroundings.
And what about Buck? How did that happen for him? Was it cultivated or did it happen because of his surroundings? What was it that made him the hero?
I think it was both because he was the oldest child of that family, which meant when his father, who was a colonel in the Civil War, was gone, the responsibility of his family fell to him at a young age. And with that kind of responsibility, I think it was just, I think it was in him to start with and cultivated afterwards by the responsibility that was required of him at that time. As you read through the book, you find that he starts at a young age knowing how to track, knowing how to hunt, knowing how to skin, knowing how to prepare the meat so his family didn't have to do without. And not only did he do that, but he enjoyed doing that, which plays a part in his teenage years. Because this book is set for his years of preteen all the way up through probably his later teens. This is a very young age book, but it's as an adult life, which is something that is completely different than what the 2014, 2013, all of us are used to.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. There's no question. And you believe that Buck's the hero in this book, right?
I do.
And it's a tremendous story. I mean, it's very exciting. It's one of those books where you're probably not going to sit down and read the whole thing in one shot because there's so much there to think about, isn't there?
There is. There is. And I sat down and I read it through in one setting and then I went back and I read it over again. Because like you said, there is so much in there, so much to think about, so much going on. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, you definitely have combined a lot of things in this book. There's no question. The Ku Klux Klan makes an appearance in this book.
Yes,
Uh,
it does.
and what was the impetus for the Ku Klux Klan being a part of the Night of the Dixie Wilds? What brought them into this book?
From my understanding is that after Buck's family moved to Texas, they moved into a portion of East Texas that was not inhabited well, and it opened it up for crime to occur. And from what I've read is that there was a lot of the ex-slaves who were filled with anger and bitterment over their condition and has decided that this is now the time to repay others for what had been done to them. Because of this fact that it is mentioned in the book that the homesteads and the women who were unprotected while the men were doing the field work or the animals or being in town or whatever they needed to do. And I think at this time, this is why the KKK was actually formed, was to protect their homesteads and their women from violence, from the people who were still embittered by the conditions they were forced to live for years.
Okay, that's fair enough. So they had definitely played an appearance in this role, and Christianity plays makes an appearance in this role in this book too, right?
It does. It does. Um, Back in that time, our country was founded on the Christian principles, and um, they lived their life that way. They had the Bible, they went to church, they prayed together. It was a common thing.
Yeah, even the Ku Klux Klan claimed that, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, those guys. Wow. There are
Well, I
places I
do
could
want to,
go. The places I could
yeah,
go with the KKK.
I would like to point out one thing about the KKK in this book.
Okay,
The
that's what we want you to
author,
do.
okay, the author in 1929, Walter E. Taylor, okay, he points out that after the Reconstruction years, which was from 1865 to 1870, the KKK disbanded. I didn't know if you knew that. Okay, and he points out in the book that later, when the KKK reformed in the 1900s, it is not the same group that was for the Reconstruction years because he disagreed with the KKK that was formed in the 1900s because of their mental state of it. So between the years of 1865 and 1870, it was formed for protection of families in their homesteads. And I feel like that's important
Hmm.
because there's some very awful deeds that were done by the KKK, as we all know, but it was also part of our history. So, like I said, at times this is a very tough book to read, but it's also a very good book as historical fact and fiction combined.
Well, you did that correctly because I was going to say that the original KKK, and I don't stand for anything the KKK does. I understand why people did what they did back in 1865 to protect their families, but it wasn't set up to protect their families specifically against the former slaves, but it was for Indians and white people who were crazy and tried to loot and pillage because they were doing it too.
That's
It really
correct.
was the Wild Wild West, and the original KKK is actually the foundation for what is now known as the Texas Marshals, correct?
I believe so, yes.
How about that? I know my history, huh?
Yes, you do.
That's why I had to stop when I read this book because I had to relax and read this because I understand these things. And I'll tell you something. One of the relationships I really enjoyed was that of Buck and King, right?
Yes,
King is a cool kid, man.
he is.
And he was
He,
also a former slave.
yes,
Their
and
slave, right?
yes, and he was an orphan. And what I found interesting about King, well, there's lots of interesting things about King, but one of the things that stands out is when they decided to move to sell their plantation and move to Texas, they made a decision not to bring any of the slaves to Texas with them, or ex-slaves at that time, excuse me, even if they wanted to. And Buck begged and pleaded for days for King to travel with them. And finally, Buck's father, the colonel, gave in. And that tells you right there the bond that King and Buck had in spite of their skin colors or their education level or their society status. And to me, that was a really special thing for this book.
Well, they were more like brothers.
Exactly.
And that's the way, and I don't want to give too much away, but you'll really enjoy where it's right in the beginning almost, where young Buck actually risked his life to save his friend. And
That's
that's a
right.
beautiful thing. That's something that we don't want to miss inside of all the other things that went on during this period. Now, you have some other characters that are interesting: Maggie, May, and Kate. Just tell us a little
Yes.
bit about them.
Oh, I love Maggie. She is someone who, well, let me put it this way. If I was to live in that era, I would want to be Maggie. Okay. I have a high regard for this young lady in this book. She was actually a couple of years older than Buck in the story. So she took, her family was without a man role model. I think her father was killed. So she took on the responsibilities back then that a man would. And she could ride a horse where many women could not at that time. She took the liberty of wearing pants back then when women didn't. And she was able to shoot better than some of the men portrayed in the book. And she was very independent and strong. And one of the best things that I liked about her is she could yodel. I think that's just so awesome. When I was reading that, I could just imagine thinking about the yodeling. And I can't do that, but it was just one of the parts of her character that I really enjoyed. She was very intelligent, even though she was uneducated as well. And that shows in the conversations that she and Buck had. And she's described as very beautiful and also modest.
Yep, she is now. May and Kate are also parts of this book. Who's May?
Uh, I don't want to divulge too much about May
That's fair
because,
enough.
yeah, she is gullible and she was taken in by some lying, not excusing her behavior, but she's the traitor. And she is a person who is exceedingly beautiful, not just the average beauty, but exceedingly so where she draws attention wherever she goes. And I kind of want to leave it at that because she is the traitor and I don't want to give too much away with the story.
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff in this book.
Yes.
There's all kinds of stuff. Now, how much research did you have to do in order to re-edit and reprint this book? Because obviously you just couldn't sit down, knock out the last 15 pages, and then send it off.
You're right. I did have to go on, I used the internet, of course, and I did research on the copyright. And I do have in the front of the book more information about my research on the copyright. And works created before January 1st, 1978 were protected until 75 years, provided certain copyright renewal formalities were followed. And what I found was that these renewal formalities were not followed. And basically, anybody could have picked up this book and republished it as their own work. Well, I didn't want to do that. That's why I put myself down as a co author of this book. And because I want to give rights to where it's due, which is to my great 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 uncle Walter E. Taylor. But I also wanted to keep it in our family. And that was why I did this. I'm not here to steal any work. I believe this is a story that needs to stay alive. And this is why I did it.
That's fair enough. Now, how much research did you actually have to do for this period of time to make it all work?
Uh, for the copyright or for the story?
No, the actual story.
Oh, for the story? Well, for the story, I didn't do a whole lot of research because basically he had the story written for it. what I did do was I did correct some spelling and grammatical issues, and I also put a memoir to him at the very back of the book. And I've also listed all the libraries that this book was sent to for the original edition. Now, I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, but he became a lawyer after the Reconstruction years and moved to Lubbock, Texas. And the printed books that he had were actually caught up in a fire in his law office. And the only one that we knew existed outside of the libraries was the one that my aunt Sharon Lindahl has in her possession, and the one that I was able to find on the internet.
Were you able to track like any of King's relatives, or?
I was not, because there's very little information on my uncle that I could find, and even less with King, because all I have is the name in the book. I don't have his real name.
And the others, you didn't know who they were either?
I did not.
All right. So now what 3 things do you want the listener to know about the Night of the Dixie Wilds?
Well, I'm really excited to let you know that the book is going to be available as an audio book late February. I'm really excited about that. And it is also available for purchase now on Amazon, and it will be available for purchase on Barnes and Nobles in February. And
Perfect.
this book, this book will touch you, touch your heart, touch your soul in a way that hasn't when you've read other historical novels. It will move you and make you think.
Well, that's definitely for sure. It will make you think. Now, what's next for you?
I'm actually moving away from the historical novels at this time, as I have 3 of them published for right now. And I'm starting a book series called The Inner Chamber. It is going to be a Christian suspense series, and I'm going to have the first one, my publishing date for book 1 of it will be November of 2014. Some of my beta readers who have already read parts of the first book have likened it to Ted Dekker and Frank Peretti. And that is an extremely wonderful compliment, and I'm very humbled by it. So I'm really excited about moving into this project.
Tremendous, and we wish you all the best with that. And the Night of the Dixie Wilds. Thank you for being on the show, K-Trina.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Okay, now where is your website?
It's www.authorkmeador.com.
And the Twitter is at author K Meador. And that's it.
That's correct.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for being on the show with me.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it very much.
All right. That was K-Trina Meador, and you can find her over at authorkmeador.com. The Night of the Dixie Wilds is a tremendous book. It'll make you think. It's a historical fiction, meaning the storyline is not all true, but the story setting is. And you can pick up the book at Amazon.com or any one of a number of places, and we'll help you try to find them. But I suggest you go out there and give this one a shot. It's pretty well written, and it's, like I said, it's definitely an educational read. All right, now that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Writer Showcase podcast. Again, if you want to be a guest on the show or would like to support the work being done, please contact me at www.thewritershow.wordpress.com. Until next time, my name is Phil Nasons. Enjoy the reading.